In this video, I'm going to show you a few ways to paint some interesting designs into your Sculpey bases. And this one is painting demon marble. I can see some of my examples here. We've got some skulls, some demon faces. You can see they kind of work their way through, some a little brighter, some just fade back into the dark parts of the marble, and that's kind of the whole idea here, is that these demon faces just kind of emerge from the marble. Obviously this is a really big 60mm base. Here's something that's a little more you're going to use for most of your miniatures, 25mm square base. So it shows this design can definitely work on a smaller scale. So some of the colors that I've got laid out for this. Got this verdigris here, green sky. This is fluorescent green. This color is emerald. Another one that I like. It has some nice intensity to it. I think this is dark sea blue right here. And this is for the base. So what we want to do is have some warm colors to contrast with all this whole line of cool colors over here. We got some olive drab, some chocolate brown, and then this from Reaper here to do some of our highlighting on the base. I've got a few bases that are ready. Here's our large scale base, a sheet of Sculpey. It was rolled out on a tile and baked, actually in a toaster oven. You can do this in a regular oven also. I have several different videos that explain how to work the Sculpey and create bases like this, where we have a small base, just like this, and a large base. I'll paint an example. So what we'll do next is talk about this palette and the brushes that we'll need. So I've got some brushes out here on the palette, divided into a few key groups. First group I'm going to talk about are these filbert brushes. Really like these because not only do you have a large flat surface to work with, but when you have some water on the tip, you can see what a nice sharp point that comes to. So you get the benefit of the rounded edge here, the broad flat surface like this, and this razor edge right here. Got a few different sizes, some bigger ones. I think this is a 6. We have another 6 over here. This is a brand that I tend to get a lot. It's called American Painter. For what you get, the price is really good. And since it's not a whole lot for each brush, you don't feel too bad when the brush kind of comes to the end of its life. This one's a little bit smaller. I think this is a number 4 right here. Then in the middle, I've got these brushes. This is a number 8 round. You can see a somewhat more battered version of that. Now these are actually some relatively inexpensive craft brushes that come in a set of 10. Yes, they're craft brushes. You can see some of these have some really nice points on them, and that point actually stays in that condition for quite a while. And when they start to get a little beat up and dog-eared, well, when they get into this condition, you can use these for painting on the sides of your base, something where you really don't want to mess up a nice pointy tip like this. And really, when you get some water on these, and this one's actually been used a little bit, has a relatively nice tip on it. And last but not least, we've got some liner brushes here. This is back to the American Painter series. Again, a nice price on these brushes. And I like these. This will hold an awful lot of water and pigment versus the spotter brushes that you see more commonly. So that's why I like to use these liner brushes. This is a somewhat higher grade. You can see it's a Winsor Newton. And again, it's a liner brush, not a spotter brush. It's going to come to a nice point there. And this is the brush that I save for my most detailed work. You can barely see it. This one is a Kolinsky Sable Series 7 Winsor Newton. So I tend to just save this for my finest details. So that's kind of the collection of brushes that we use. Next thing I want to talk about is this disposable palette. As you can see right here. It's a 9x12 palette, which is a pretty nice size, and 40 sheets. So instead of having to clean up your palette all the time, what you can do is when you're done, you can just pick this up, pull it right off. Some examples of previous palettes. Again, all I did was, you can see where I've torn it off. And I've got my little container of water. So the next thing we're going to do is lay out our colors and start painting that base. I'm going to get things started by painting this outer edge of the base here. And I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between the olive drab and that chocolate brown. I'm going to mix up some water to make sure that it gets down into all these crevices. You can see that I've gone to the craft brush that's a little more chewed up, because again, I don't feel bad about taking this brush and stabbing it into this cork. This is really absorbent. I'm just gonna work along this edge, just making sure that all this is covered. Now you can use any other warmer color for this. Again, I would recommend something that's warmer, so you contrast with all this cool color that's on this side of the palette. So every so often, just pick the other brown. And once I've gotten this initial layer on, I'm going to leave this alone. And I'll let this dry and we'll work on our top surface. So let's put out a little more. Now you could, even at this stage if you wanted to, mix some of the lighter color in. You can see it almost turns a little bit gray. And that's exactly what we did on the sample base. Again, just not terribly careful with how we're mixing the colors here, just to get a variety. And all that we're trying to do at this stage is just make sure everything is covered. Wherever I see exposed oxide paste, gravel. The camera might even be shaking, actually, from how vigorous these brush strokes are. And that's really kind of saying something, because this is a really heavy drafting table. So I think we've got that just about all filled in. So I can leave that be. Got my paper towel, wipe off some of that from the brush. Now I've got some paint that overflowed on the edge. Just wipe that away. Again, we're going to leave that alone. Let's think about what we've got up on top here. I'm going to choose one of my filberts. I think I'm going to go with this number 4. What I want to do is just have, see this kind of lighter patch, and these dark patches. Dark patches are important because that's where the skulls really kind of emerge from the marble. So I'm going to start. These are the two most colors, the most important colors, the emerald and the deep sky blue. And I'm going to decide early on where I want this to be lighter, darker. I want that to be an interesting pattern, no matter what. So I don't want to just go light, light, dark, dark. Let's try something like this. You can see how I'm holding the brush down on the end, not getting it, because we're not doing detailed stuff yet. We're just trying to figure out where we want all these colors to be. So here's that emerald, and you can see once that's out on this, wow, it's this nice, deep, rich color. And because I didn't really clean out the brush, now I just got some nice wet into wet blending here, and I can kind of continue this. So as I'm going to pull this together. So we start with this really hard, sharp border, but you can see how glossy the paint is. It's still wet. If we were using a little tiny liner brush for all this, we wouldn't be able to do what I just did. And that's right away, we already have some blending going on. And since we're actually putting lots of other designs into this, this could be a sufficient enough blend right here. But you want to keep a good pace because the Sculpey is absorbent. So you can see already so that's starting to dry. Which is not a big deal because you can always throw some more color back out on there if you want to continue with your wet into wet blending. So now you see I'm kind of waving this back because I'm blending right here. Already did all kinds of nice, smoother blends. Let's get a little more. Again, you don't have to be afraid to go back in. To your deep sky blue. See how I'm using this kind of a hooked stroke right here. I can use a flat stroke. Let's twist this around. So in no time at all, I already have So we've got a little bit of a pattern. It works its way lighter, darker. Now at this point, I don't want this emerald to get too bright. I might have one area here that gets a little bit brighter, and then just leave it be. And the idea here is to have some smoother blending. I don't want to have a lot of hard edges. And that's where this really helps. See this rounded edge? That's what was letting me do all this feathery blending. So this edge, I feel that I want this to be a little bit lighter. Now if I want something to be a little darker, let's go over here in this corner, make this corner a little bit more of a solid, deeper dark. And again, what I'm kind of doing, I'll do this on my thumb. So that's about what I'm doing. It's not dry brushing because that's how much pigment there is. It's kind of a scumbling stroke that helps to blend this all together. Feel like I need a little more dark over here. This also works relatively more easily on the Sculpey because the Sculpey has a little more of a tooth to it. Even though this looks pretty smooth, it still has a little bit of a tooth, which means we can kind of drag the brush across that surface. So I have a few little white gaps. So I'm going to go back this brush and fill those in. I might even mix these two together. Any gaps that I see, I'm going to fill those. There's another one over here. So this, you can see around our outer edge, we're still waiting on that to dry. That's fine, because we can continue to work on the top. So once you've got this to a point where you're satisfied, this is the basic layout of how we want the colors to look. My next stage, what I'm going to do is start to indicate where the skulls are and then some of the demon faces. So what I'll do is clean off my synthetic filbert brush. Rubbing alcohol is also good to have on hand to get some of that paint out of your brush. I'm going to start with one of these craft brushes here. This one again, it's kind of broken in. It's not the super fine point, but it's broken in. And I'm going to use something here called Glaze Medium. I think Reaper also makes some of this. And what I'm going to do is grab some of that emerald with a tiny bit of the deep sky blue so it's not too bright too quickly. And this is what we're going to use to indicate some of the skulls. Now I have to figure out a pattern here because I want this. I can't have all the skulls facing the same way. What I wanted to do is have them be tilted, facing different directions. How do we do that? Let's just pick a corner. I'm going to choose this one right here. And just going to put the indication of a skull shape. It's kind of rounded on the top. It's kind of the jaw here. And then I'm going to twist this around. Put another one facing in a slightly different direction. This one facing a slightly different direction. This one kind of sandwiched into those two. Now remember, not every part of this has skulls on it, because we have to leave room for the eyes and the demon faces. So instead of just jamming this all full of skulls here, maybe I'm just going to put one here and leave this little bit of a gap. I'm going to put another one here. You don't have to worry about defining the edges too much right now. That's going to happen later as we're going to build up on this. I'm also going to change the size. So we have some of the bigger ones here. Well, I want to have some smaller ones too. So you can see I'm kind of staying away from this area right now, because this color is not even as light as that. And we can make that, when we work into this area, we're going to have some lighter color as our skulls work into that. So I'm going to leave this area now. Again, I don't want to focus too much on one section. I want to move this around. So let's say over here, we want to have more of a demon face. So what I'm going to do is use a few simple strokes to sort of indicate where that's going to be. So that's kind of the mouth. Let's have the eyes like this. This part of it will extend down, maybe into the next indication of a face. Same thing here. This is going to maybe indicate another face. I can even throw a few skulls in here. Again, don't worry about the eye sockets. That's not our concern right now. We're just trying to establish our pattern. So here, it's another darker section. Let's do the same thing. Let's have a face right here. And just sort of feather this out. Spin this around. Put another face this way. So this is really good for some sort of chaos miniature, something that's maybe tainted, or let's do some skulls in this little section here. You can see I'm holding the brush to be a little more precise. Not quite there at the super detail yet. Don't want to get that tight. And just waltzing around the base. See here, nothing's going to show up, so we're not playing around with that area just yet. Now I'm going to throw a few more of these skulls over here. And these are smaller. I want some in the center now. So I'm going to kind of throw one down that's a little bit bigger. And then what I'm going to do is, just like I did in the other sections, I'm going to kind of build off of that. See how I kind of use the base to anchor myself? Let's see how the skull was going this way. Now they're kind of rotating around this way. So we've kind of spun the skulls around. That's what we want those to do, is just not all be in the same pattern. So this is all just about what we want to do. So there we go. And it's just an indication. Look at how much brighter that all gets. This is just to show where we might want our pattern to be. So to lighten up the emerald, and this is something we're going to do slowly, gradually. So I've mixed in some of that. I think this was the sky green. There's a green sky. So it's going to be slightly lighter. So what we're going to do is start to work in here. This is kind of the teeth there. Now if this is too light too quickly, that's why I like this palette here. I have all my other previous colors out, so it's really easy to darken this down because I already had my previous colors still out on the palette. I'll leave the eyes alone at this point because that's what the fluorescent green is for. So you can see now I'm starting to work in a more detailed way. I'm bracing my fingers together, and I'm going to pick some skulls to make lighter. Not all of these, just some. Because that's what's going to let these sort of emerge from the darker parts of the marble. And I don't want to get stuck. I don't want to get stuck in one area for too long. I want to make sure I'm constantly rotating this base around, working in different areas, because if I do all this area here, there's nothing to compare it to. So it might get too light, too much contrast, too little contrast. It's easier to tell if I have the rest of the base to compare that to. You can see how this is slightly lighter than our original section that we did. So I'm going to head back over there, just like I did in the other section. Start to pull out some of these skulls. Now I'm doing this relatively quickly. You obviously can take a little more time. Just want to make sure that you can see all the different stages that it takes to make a base like this. So these, already I'm starting to leave some of those alone. Let's rotate this around. And let's work on this little part of the demon face here. And some indication of some kind of teeth. Got a skull over here that I'm going to work on. The next face. Again, brace this up. Like so. You can see what even with the brush that's a little bit worn, there's still a nice point on the end of this. It's just a craft brush, that's all it is. It's literally a 50-cent brush. It's not going to last maybe as long as a $30 brush. But what it will do is it will let your $30 brush have a much longer lifespan. See, I've almost got two faces next to each other there. It's okay. Especially on something like this, you see something, you say, oh, I'm gonna change this around. Another thing that's going to affect your design, your overall design, is where the footprint of the miniature is going to be. If there's going to be a giant figure with a really large footprint right in this area, well, I don't paint that. What I'll do sometimes is put the figure on the base first and mark where it's going to stand. And I say, you know what, I'm not going to do too much of my design here. It's all going to be covered up. One of my Warhammer armies, every single base was done with this demon marble, and some of them had chariots, and needless to say, the chariots covered up a significant portion of my designs. That's something I just had to live with. I knew it was coming. I knew that I was going to cover up a good portion of my design, but I had to accept that and say, well, it's about the overall effect. So what I did was I saved this part for last, so you can see how right away we got a lot of nice flow to this base, and we're building up slowly. Still waiting on this to dry. I might even use my hair dryer to dry that off faster if need be, but you don't have to worry about that just yet. Got some of this, more of the green sky. Gonna go back in. Now there will be a certain point where I set aside a craft brush here for one of my liner brushes to do the detail work. But for now, this craft brush is doing just fine. So again, I'm picking out right here. And we're going to go lighter still. We're just kind of gradually, this is a little bit different from my usual approach, which is start lighter and work darker. With this, since I really want this design to kind of emerge from the dark, it just made a little more sense to start with the darker colors. I have tried the other way and that also yields some interesting results, starting, say, lighter and working darker. I think it'll be a little bit more difficult for you, because I was using some of my watercolor training, actually. See, I'm leaving some of these faces on, not getting too light here. I'm letting these get lighter. I know I want these to be a little brighter. And you can start to see how I'm also, as I work lighter, see, I'm already starting to think about the final shape of some of these skulls. The first layout of the color was very rough. All I wanted to do was indicate where the shapes were. But with each progressive lighter color, I'm starting to think more about the final shape of each of these skulls. And if you notice that the glaze medium, by putting some of that in with this paint, it helps to keep it wetter. I know some people use a wet palette. I didn't really feel like I needed it, especially with the glaze medium. It's already keeping my paints wetter. And I have another little trick that I like to do to keep my paints from drying out. I actually save these covers. Well, guess what? Put that cover over that. That's going to stay pretty wet, especially if I have a weight on top of it. Let's say I want to keep all of these colors. Have it even bigger. And I can even spray a little water under there. That's gonna, I've kept things wet for 2 days, covering them up like that. So we'll just continue to work our way around the base. Not just picking out the skulls and making them lighter, but also creating a little more detail. Now there will be places where, say I want some more, even more contrast. I take some of this deep sky blue and work some more shadow colors in, make those shadow areas even darker. But again, by working over the whole surface, I don't get too distracted working in one area. I have the whole thing to compare. Alright, so at this point, what I'm going to do is try and get the whole base dried off. The sides, this top section, because sometimes you can see how that's a little bit glossy there. As you work your way through this pattern, sometimes that glossy, that can be a little bit of a distraction. So what I can do is put this down, put some weight on top of it, and I'm going to dry off this base. So all of this area is much drier now. So I think it's time we start to put some color there. You can see I'm mixing in some of that really pale flesh tone with the olive drab and the chocolate brown. I have a few different colors I can work with. I've got a filbert brush, and I'm going to start to drag that across the top edges of my texture. So this is not the kind of wild and crazy dry brushing that I guess is traditionally associated with that. It's actually, again, there's a lot of pigment there. It's all about the type of stroke, holding it down on the end of the brush, down here, holding my base, and just gently grazing along the top edges of the surface. And do this all around the base. Not getting too light too quickly. We're still going to do some dark glazes in the deepest crevices. You can see some of those rocks start to emerge. Now another thing you can do, where's my weight? You can either magnetize the bottom of this, or you can use some blue tack. I'm going to put this down on top of this, and it's going to almost be like a little bit of a pedestal. So I'm going to squeeze this down. What that's going to do is it's going to free up my hand. And once I can just rotate this around. All the while being sure to pick up some pigment. See how much easier that is. Normally my bases like this would already be magnetized because all of my movement trays, my carrying case, all of that is actually, every single thing is magnetized. I never really have to do much in the way of packing and unpacking. It's pretty much just pick up the miniature, set it down on a piece of sheet metal, and it's done. Even figures for competitions, I magnetize the bottom of the base because usually the whatever kind of plinth I've got it standing on, that is also got a little piece of sheet metal on it. So I just work my way around. And this is just really, it's like a little carousel. I could even just set it down on the palette and just rotate. Let's squeeze out a little more. This. Now, one thing I don't want to have happen is for this to just be exclusively warm colors. So at a certain point here, I am going to start to work in some of this green along this side edge here. But you can see that's a healthy amount of paint there. That is not completely dry. The filbert brush is what helps me feather that color on. So again, still not at the lightest color yet. I'm just working my way up. And what this does is it not only sets up a contrast in color temperature, that's kind of a little color wheel type thing, So even in this, okay, this is our cool section. This and then these are probably the two coolest colors of the bunch. This one is it's considered a cool color compared to this, but yet these, they have more yellow. That makes those a little warmer. Let's grab a little of this, mix it in here. We're going to throw that in just a few isolated areas on the side of the base. So I did it here and here, not in here. That's going to stay warmer. Working my way all the way up to the top edge here. Back to some of this green. And again, you have this option of just kind of sitting it here, rotating it around. It's a little painting merry-go-round. Now when it comes to painting the top surface of this, I may have to abandon my little pedestal because it could make it a little harder for you to see painting on the top. I don't know, we'll see when we get to that. Now that I've got so much paint along the sides here, I'm hoping that I can leave it on my carousel. Didn't do that to start off with because it was kind of some aggressive motions and that would have just popped it right off of this. So what we're doing now obviously is a little bit more gentle. And just feathering this lighter and lighter. Don't want it to be too bright. If it gets too bright, it's going to kill what we've got up here. This is where the action is, not along the sides. And again, have to remember there's still another layer of color we're going to put here, and that's our darkest glazing and shading. So you have to think of that. That's still coming yet. So now we're going to think about our brightest. Get rid of some of the excess. Find a few spots we want that to go. Now let's say maybe in some of these areas down here, maybe you think that's a little too monochromatic. You could add something that's got a little more redness to it. Let's say something like this. That's a bit of a darker flesh tone. Something like this, which is kind of a medium grade flesh tone. Throw it out there just so you can see. This is going to be a little bit more reddish. I don't want too much out there. Now let's put a little bit of that right here. Because on a large base like this, it could get a little bit boring. Smaller base, you're not going to have to really worry about that because you just don't have on here, not as much to worry about. On this bigger base, there's so many different parts for people to look at. I want to make sure there's something interesting for them to see. You can already see just how warm this is that we've introduced, so we don't want to go too crazy with it. Okay. So I am going to kind of leave this alone for now, and we're going to get back to this top level. Now that we're going to let this part of the base kind of sit for a while before we do our darker glazes, we want to get back to our up here. And you can see I'm going to continue mixing the green sky in with the emerald. And this should be one more stage lighter. So I'm going to indicate where my eyes are. So I've changed the shape of the eyes again. And it's going to be the same thing over here. I'm going to change the shape of the eyes. And that happens a lot with this type of a base. You're going to change it and alter it as you go along. And that's okay. I've done the same thing here. See, this thing is still keeping a nice point. So I can keep on working. Holding it down more towards the end though, because we are getting a little more detailed. Here's another case where I'm going to change the shape of the eye. I may even change it back. I might change it a couple more times. This is, it's about chaos here. It's not about law and order. It can change, it can move around. I can see, just like I mentioned last time, I'm starting to think more about some of the details on these skulls. So I'm already starting to think about the eye sockets, all the while still thinking in terms of this goes lighter, this one's not, this one's lighter, these are not. And just the way this is all starting to work out, I think this is where the lightest skulls are going to be here in the center. And even on the skulls that are going to be darker, see that? See, I worked on the edge of this here. Same thing on this skull. So not only are the skulls in my area of center of interest, not only are those going to be brighter, but there's going to be some more details. And that shows up here. See these brightest skulls, so you can really see that. Well, look, this is just kind of a flat shape with a few little dark blue dots. These, there's more definition. And we're on our way to doing the same thing on this second base. So again, thinking about a little more detail there. Some skulls allow it to recede by virtue of being darker and less detail, and some that we're bringing out by doing just the opposite. I kind of have the luxury here of not worrying about a miniature and the footprint that it's going to have on this base. Obviously, if I was to put some kind of a large creature on this, I'd probably lose a good 30% of this design. This is all about making your special characters or things in your army or whatever just a little bit more special, a little more customized. And you could do this with any set of colors. we could have done this with reds and yellows and oranges if we wanted to. I chose this because it's almost a little more of a subtle color arrangement. The red can get really bright really fast. You can see I've mixed a little bit more of the green sky. This is probably going to be one of the last layers that I do that's got the green sky, because next layer up I'm going to put that brighter verdigris color in, and that'll be sort of the final highlight on most of the skulls, these parts of the demon faces. So you can see what I've done here. Start to highlight a few parts of these skulls. Now here, the highlights are going to be done by adding this. So what's going to happen here is the colors that I'm putting here, this is about as bright as this is going to get. This is the lightest colors I'm going to do. See, I'm kind of focusing in on the crest, top part of the skulls here. And you can kind of see some of these, the cheekbones here. Focusing in on that. So these guys here, we'll do it a little bit lighter. Hopefully you can see some of these little details. I'm going to hold this a little bit closer. Every so often, just pick out a little bit of a detail. What I did over here, I'm going to do on this side. So fortunately, it looks like I can still use my little pedestal here. I was worried that it was going to raise it out of the camera level. So what I'm doing is I'm bracing my hand against base. So see how my hand started down here. As I work the base, it's creeping further and further down towards the ferrule. So now we've got it in a much more detailed oriented position. All the while trying to be very conscious of how all of these different elements relate to each other. So I still want a little something here. I might just take my finger and knock that down. Just didn't want it to be too flat. I think we've taken the green sky mix about as far as we can. So now let's look at how much brighter that is. So we have to make sure we keep this under control. We don't want to get too bright. Mix this all together. Come to a point. And now we're going to work on these skulls in the center here. It's all about increasing the definition. Cheekbones, maybe in a little bit above the eye socket. So we've already started in more details there. Same thing on this guy. And you can see now that I'm doing fewer and fewer skulls with details, I'm just I'm literally moving from one skull to another, just in different sections. So thinking about these in the center, drawing on a little more detail. Same thing with our little demon faces, brightening up. Got these teeth here. Same on this guy. You can make these longer if you wanted to. Instead of having this all the same, let's make these go a little bit longer like this. Same thing here. Maybe make some of these longer. You can see we're kind of drawn into the center. What helps also, look at this. These are like arrows. I'll directly say, look here in the center. Everything pointing you in this direction. Look at all the skulls even. They follow the same pattern as the faces. Just like here, it's pointed, moves you around the base, kind of gathering you into the center here. Composition, I know that's more of an art term, but really it matters not just on your bases, it matters on your miniatures too. And I try to think of that whole center of interest. Think of the pattern, trying to get the person to look at your miniature. If you want people to really look at your stuff, well, make it as interesting as possible for them. Give them something to see. You can see I've gotten just about to my brightest highlight here. So at a certain point, I just have to kind of say enough. Enough with these lighter colors. It's almost time to introduce introduce some of the darks here. First, before that, we're going to add our few small areas of the fluorescent green, and that'll be on the eyes of the little demon faces. So you can see here, bringing out some of the cheekbones, letting these recede. Every so often, a little brighter highlight. I'm going to leave this one alone. Put a little something there. And hold this a little bit closer. So you can see some of the things that have been done. Let's get a little more definition on this guy. So you see the thing we've got there. I'm going to put out a little bit of this fluorescent green. And where we've got our eyes, put some of that down. It's pretty transparent, which is why I had some of the other green sky underneath it, because it really wouldn't have covered that deep blue. So again, doing the eyes. I'm actually overpainting a little bit because that almost gives those a bit of a glow. And look again, where's that concentrated? It's all concentrated in this center area here. or we've drawn the person's eye. It's gonna draw them even more now, having some of this brighter fluorescent color. So let's mix a little bit of the verdigris in. And let's hold this a little bit closer. Spin this around. Like that. Now, what you could do if you wanted to is, let's make this guy really sad here. Okay. So I'm gonna leave this as it is, let that settle down a little bit, and what we'll do is go back into some of our darks to make all these little eye socket things and restore some of the darks in the faces. In this next step, we're going to take that deep sky blue, hold this a little closer for you to see, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to make, this is where the skulls, instead of looking like little round domes, start to look like actual skulls. Then I'm going to start with the ones that have the most detail, the most highlights. Eye sockets, little indication of the nose. This is relatively thinned down paint. Again, if you're more comfortable using a liner brush, that's fine. This is such a huge base that I'm comfortable using the point of my 50-cent craft brush. So again, since this is going to be an area of interest, what I might do, watch what I'm going to do here. So I'm painting around the edge here. And watch what I'm going to do. And actually create a skull where there was none before. I'm even going to put two little eye socket things. Let's do this over here too. Because what this did, kind of a multi-purpose thing. This is going to stand out a little bit more, but I've even got some just shadowy skulls in the background. This is another important one right here because it's lots of detail. This top section now here, this will define the eyes. This mouth area, same thing here. And we'll just continue to march our way around this base. Say we didn't like that, wipe it off, back in, saved. Let's say right here, same thing again. Let's indicate these eyes a little more strongly with our dark. Here too. And give it a little bit of a slit for, there we go. Let's make him look a little more nasty, a little more threatening. all the while bringing out tiny bit of detail here and there. And where I feel that I can get away with it, I actually, like I did on the one in the center, doing a little bit of that. Because I feel I want that skull to have some definition. Again, continuing to sharpen up some of these details. I've got one last set of the demon eyes here. As I get into these little kind of shadow skulls here, I don't get quite as detailed. It's more of an indication than anything else. Also, if some of this, say it stands out too much, well, we could always mix up a wash or a glaze and tone that down. I might even show you that when we do some of our glazing and shading along the sides here. Here again, put in kind of a little sneaky extra skull here. Maybe even one in here. See how I'm kind of adding painting. It's called working in the negative space. I don't want to get too much into those type of terms, but that's what we used to call it back in the day. It was space that was mostly open. We've added something to it. So that just about completes this next stage. Which means the next section coming up, it's going to be this around the outside. Few more. Now I'm not going to define anything more on these skulls except those couple of dots where the eyes should go. Okay. So let's leave this. And we'll get ready to do some glazing around the sides. To do some of that dark glazing around our edges of the base here, I've got some washes from Secret Weapon. I also use Vallejo, even GW washes, but I tend to like these Secret Weapon washes for the sides of the bases. They make really a lot of nice, it's almost like they just were completely made for basing. Got actually a heavy body black. It's a nice deep dark. The sewer water here, Armor Wash, is also a nice one. Some dark sepia. Sometimes I throw out even more, but I'm just going to go with these basic 3, keep it kind of simple. What I'll do is kind of get these out here so you can see what they do. And don't be afraid to mix them together. So what I'll do is concentrate the darkest color in these deepest recesses, save some of this lighter for out here. This is a little more green to it. Let's put that there. And you can see I've got one of those kind of more distressed craft brushes. I'm just using that. You can see this is very targeted. See, not every part of this even gets covered with this wash. And I always keep a paper towel handy, because sometimes what I like to do is pull some of that away. I'll just work my way around. Be careful of this top edge. Every so often going into the really deep black right here. So we're going to get that down in there. All the while making sure to vary the color. Pull away when I think I want to get some of my lights restored. Don't want to lose your highlights. You can always go back over it again, but it sort of saves you time. Why have to paint that over when all you can do is just pull it away like so. So again, it's just, see, I've almost kind of circumnavigated the entire outer part of this base. Not a whole lot of time. What this is going to do, see, it's starting to bring out all that nice texture that we got from all of our rocks and gravel, our Sculpey, and the cork. Almost completed with this task. Pull away some of this. Now if you really want to get a little more of the smaller areas, let's go to a liner brush. Just like our craft brushes, this is one that's kind of seen better days. It's not pristine anymore. Not really good for doing, say, freehand or painting tiny eyes. But what it is good for is what you see me doing right here. And that's putting some really targeted areas of dark glaze just where I need them. So I can see by not just slathering the wash everywhere, I still have my highlights. I don't have to go back in and repaint those. They're still there. Now this is really shown more on the glazing video. but at least this gives you a little hint of how that all works. And you can take this as far as you need to. I think I'm just going to call that a day. And I'm definitely going to dry that off a bit so that we can go back onto our top level here and do some more of the kind of the finishing details. So let's call it a day on the dark glazing. The side of the base mostly dry. Can get back into final details that I want to do on this top section. Now, just throwing out a little bit of black on the palette. Another color I actually want to introduce is a Reaper color, and this is called Deep Twilight. It's actually a really dark purple color. And what I had done on this base, some of the darkest areas, I'd actually used a little bit of the purple and some black. Got one of my liner brushes out here. What I did was in some of the mouths of the demons. See if you can see this here. And just something to draw that a little bit more, get a little more oomph in these recesses here. I'm going to do another one over here on the side. See, that also makes the teeth a little more prominent. And this is all up to you if you want to do this. You don't have to. Go to this one right here. Same thing. Just brings it out a little bit more. This subtle bit of purple and black adds just enough warmth so that it draws it out from all the cooler colors. There's that terminology again, warm and cool. So I'm just kind of working my way around. Can even do some of this on the skulls here, especially in the center section. Maybe want these to stand out a little more. So you can see everything more tight control. We're bracing our finger. Got the smaller brush, holding it closer to the ferrule. So we can do these final details. I'm just bringing these out even more. But let's say maybe something's a little bit too bright. You want it a little bit darker. Well, there's a few different ways you could approach that. Got our deep sky blue. Or dark sky blue, I guess it's called. So let's say these, we want these to be toned down. All I did is thin that down with some water. And this is all I'm going to do. And just wash, a little bit of a wash over that, calm it down. Same thing over here. Maybe we just want these to be more in the background. This is all very controlled. Tone some of these down. Now we're not wiping them out. You can see they're still there. We've just made these a little bit more pushed into the background. Same thing on these guys. Still there. They're not gone. All I've done is tone things down a little bit. Maybe same thing over here on this side. Depending on how much water you put in or don't put in, obviously less water, more pigment is going to cover things up. So I'll do this. You see how it just about covered that completely. I'll just work my way around, toning things down as I think I need to. Now I didn't do this on the sample base, but on my entire army collection I had actually put a few dots of the fluorescent green and a few select skulls. I'm going to try that just to see how that looks. So we bring back this over here, and bring back a little tiny bit of this fluorescent green. And this opaque lighter color, make sure that it actually stands out. So let's mix a little bit of this up. And that's enough for right now. Then I'm going to pick a few of these eye sockets right there. If you can see what I just did, probably can. A couple of more. Let's move around and do a few of these. And again, it's not every single one. Because what's fun, I got some of these skulls that are kind of receding in the back. Well, let's do this. See what I've done now? That creates a little more. Not all of these do, but look at some of these guys in the background do. That's why I toned those down, because I was kind of making way for this. Let's do this over here. Hopefully you can see this. It's little tiny dots. And I did this on pretty much all of my bases and on some of these skulls, and it just, all of a sudden now, it makes the eyeballs of these demon faces not quite so unusual. They don't stand out quite so much because now we have Have this also on some of the skulls. What I'm going to do also is take a little bit of that fluorescent. Some of this right here. So we got lots of action now. All kinds of action going on. Right here, some of these background skulls, same thing. So there's more, look at this. So we've got, even though this is lighter, this is that emerald green, and this is the really dark sea blue here. We just have all kinds of nice things. Lots for the viewer to see. Now that I've darkened this down over here, look at what happens. Makes these little guys show up that much more, and that's why. So I went back and darkened some of those down, hoping. Look, I don't even have a skull here. I'm just gonna put a few peekaboo dots there. Also, if you wanted to, let's break out a little bit of our brightest flesh tone. Let's grab our filbert. I'm going to take a little bit of my wash. Let's pop a few little, maybe some bright highlights along this edge. Make sure we haven't lost some of the brightest highlights. Just a few, not much. Just a little bit here and there. All right. So with these last few touches here, I think we've got ourselves pretty scary looking demon marble base. That is ready. All ready for a miniature.
dresser in your darkened best. Well, here is the place where you can join the rest. Pray for me, and if you so believe, and let me hear your words.
And do not weep for
I
me.
live and I learn from what I have discerned. Look, go and say those words.
And do not weep for me.
Embrace this night with all of your might. Look, go and say those words.
And do not weep for me.
And live this way until the end of your days. Go and say those words. And do not weep for me. Place of gold where winds are blowing cold. And here is where that all your tales get told. The blast of glad or both good and both bad. For here is where that all your fun gets had. The game you play, you'll dance the night away. Laughing as you go to stalk your prey. The fancy dresser in your darkened best.